G'day, I'm Rob.
Guten Abend, ich bin David.
Mag das Klimaanlage auf, bitte. Ich habe das für you. Hello, and welcome to Alternate Galaxies, the spin-off from the Doctor Who show where we look at great sci-fi and fantasy that's out there that might be of interest to other Doctor Who fans. And tonight, Dave, we're looking at, and I think this is why you were speaking German then, the NeverEnding Story.
Yes, that is right. The movie adaptation of the German book by a German company, The NeverEnding Story.
Yes, and people might be thinking, why on earth are you guys doing this? And I'll confess, I'll put my hand up. It was a suggestion from me. Around the time we were doing the Lord of the Rings Alternate Galaxies and leaning into the idea that alternate galaxies can be fantasy stuff, not just sci-fi, it struck me that, hey, NeverEnding Story is this film that's really a bit of a classic now. Not just a cult classic, but a classic. And it's a film I knew you'd spoken of in the past, so I thought, well, this is going to be an easier sell than saying, hey, Dave, let's do Lady Hawk or Red Sonja or something from the fantasy genre, which I would bet real money you haven't even seen those films to even know whether you want to do an episode on them.
Or heard of.
Brilliant. So I threw it up in the air and graciously you said, yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No, it's definitely a movie that has quite a legendary status, particularly big out here in Australia, I understand.
Yeah, it definitely was. I was a decent age when this came out. I was 9 going on 10, so I can remember this quite well. It was very popular, particularly with the girls at school. These sort of fantasy films sort of played a bit better with the girls at school, but a lot of guys liked it as well. Yeah.
Yeah, right, okay.
Which might be a nice segue into our backgrounds with the film, Dave. Do you want to hit us first with your background with the film?
Yeah, so I'll do a quick sort of summary, and then I think we'll come back and talk in perhaps more detail about our childhood memories, because we're going to both have some of them, although because of our different ages, probably slightly different memories. Now, Rob, this came out in the US in July of 1984, having already come out in Germany, and so I think you were telling me off air it came out here in Australia about 6 months later, 5 months later on Boxing Day of 84.
Yeah, it was a Boxing Day film, yeah.
Yeah, right, okay. Well, look, I was 4 at the time, so I don't remember it coming out per se, and I didn't go and see it as a 4-year-old, obviously. But I do remember in prep the next year and sort of being very young, this being in the zeitgeist, sort of it being in the oeuvre. It was something that people had heard of. We as school kids knew the name, The NeverEnding Story. We definitely knew the song. I think we definitely knew the song and some of the imagery. But the first time I would have seen it, I reckon, would have been about 1987, which would have been when it first came on to commercial TV here as a early evening movie. And I do recall Dad thinking, oh, this is a big fantasy movie that I think he was curious to watch. I thought, David would like to watch that as well. So I was sort of put down in front of it. And I do remember sort of being allowed to stay up, what probably wasn't all that late realistically, but was certainly later than a 7-year-old would normally stay up. And I saw it as a kid. And I'll talk more about my memories and impressions as a kid in a moment, because I think that needs to be explored quite a bit, given it is intended to be a kid's film. The second time I saw it would have been around about the year 2000, when I just bought my first DVD player, and the household's first DVD player. And I think, like a lot of us at that time, we were sort of going through the bargain bins at the local DVD shop and seeing what we could do to build up our DVD collection for as little as possible. And the NeverEnding Story would have been, $5 or something. Something, a very vanilla, just straightforward release that I bought and I watched it. And over the time I thought, okay, it's good, but as a cynical sort of 19, 20-year-old, I was probably a bit, is it all that good? And I probably wasn't really watching it all that well. But then about 5 years ago, I went and saw it at the cinema. And that's the one that I really remember sitting there, watching on the big screen and going, I really get this now. It was more than just a collection of not disparate childhood memories, but sometimes conflicting or not quite coherent childhood memories. And that was the time. And so this is the fourth time as well. And I'll save my powder on what I thought of it this time. But yeah, it's something that I've seen 3 times before this, at 3 very different ages.
Yeah, I've got an interesting background with the film too, Dave, insofar as I don't know why I didn't see this at the movies. This is really weird. I sat down and thought about this because I was being taken to the movies regularly as a very young child, but I have very distinct memories by the time I was 5 years old, of going to like Empire Strikes Back in 1980 and Gallipoli in 1981. And then my memories get really strong. E.T. 82, Return of the Jedi 83. And then 1984 was just insane for me at the movies. I saw Ghostbusters, I saw Temple of Doom, I saw Gremlins, I saw The Karate Kid. All these movies were in 1984. And as we said earlier, NeverEnding Story was a Boxing Day 84 film here. So that was this year. I saw loads of films, but going into 85, another great year for films, you know, Goonies, Rocky IV, Back to the Future, all of that. I didn't see the NeverEnding Story. I did see it on VHS as a new release, which I presume would have been later in 85, but I never saw it on the big screen, and to this day I still haven't seen it on the big screen. And best I can explain this is if it came out on Boxing Day, as all the online entries are saying, I don't recall us being a Boxing Day sort of movie family, like, oh, let's go to the movies on Boxing Day. And because it was the summer holidays, maybe we went on holidays, maybe we were up in Queensland somewhere like we seem to be every summer holidays. I don't know. And my mum's not around to ask anymore. And if I asked my dad why we didn't go to see the NeverEnding Story in 1985, he'll probably look at me like I'm nuts. He probably doesn't even know what the NeverEnding Story is, let alone why we didn't go to see it. But yeah, long story short, Dave, I never saw this at the cinema, but I did see it, say the year it came out, despite it being in my wheelhouse as the kind of film I would like. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I was just reflecting then, because you're sort of running through all those movies that I was just a little bit too young to see. I reckon, if my memory serves, it would have been Flight of the Navigator in 86 was the first sort of big US summer blockbuster that I remember going to see with a bunch of friends.
Nice. Whereas I was seeing Top Gun that year.
Yeah, and this is where, in most cases, the 5-year age difference between us is kind of a bit of a blip. But go back to the 80s and it's a gulf.
Oh, It's insane. You know, you're saying, I'm watching Flight of the Navigator. I'm watching Tom Cruise and Kelly McGillis having sex in Top Gun. So, you know, that's the golf, basically.
Yeah, well, yeah, okay. So, Rob, I wanted to sort of expand a bit then on how each of us found it as a kid. Now, I would have seen it at the age of 6 or 7, as I just said, when it was broadcast on free-to-air television. The memory I have of that is being scared on some occasions.
Yeah.
Being blown away in some ways. And my memories of less a coherent story than of a whole series of set pieces. And watching it again last week, I kind of understood where that memory came from, because there are a number of very clear set pieces in this. I also kind of didn't understand or found the language and the writing a bit impenetrable, but I have no doubt that as a kid, I understood the thread of the story and I understood what was going on and what needed to happen and how it needed to be solved. So I do remember that story, but it's less of a narrative as it is a whole bunch of set pieces leading up to the big finale, and certainly not being like, oh wow, yippee, this is an amazing piece of cinema, I love it, as just being like, what's going on? Why is this all happening? Yeah, very, very weird vibes.
Yeah. It's a film which, as a kid, never actually spoke to me very deeply. You know, there's this bullying theme with Bastian. I was never bullied at school, nor was I bullying anyone, I hasten to add. And Atreyu, I didn't really identify with someone in animal skins riding horses. I thought his hair was cool. I remember that. I thought, oh, he's got cool hair. And he does some action stuff, which I like. But I didn't really connect with him on any sort of deep level, like, oh, this is like my life. And the childlike Empress? No, of course not. So, to me, this was just entertainment. It was just a film I would watch, and then it was gone, you know, which is perhaps how a lot of people watched it. But I do have no doubt some people would have watched it and thought, oh, wow, this is amazing because Bastian gets the bullies in the end. Wouldn't it be great if I could do that in my life? Or little girls might have wanted to be the Empress, or maybe have, you know, a headdress like the Empress or something, and have a little boy care about them, you know, so deeply like Bastian does for her. And it just never reached me like that. I was the right age for it, like 9 going on 10. Maybe I was 10 by the time I saw it on VHS. Later in 85, but it just never it just never struck me as something I was deeply into. It didn't grab me like Star Wars did, or indeed many of these other films I mentioned, like Ghostbusters, for example. I thought Ghostbusters was amazing the second I watched it.
Yeah, it's funny you sort of say it didn't resonate for you on that sort of identification level, and I'm exactly the same. And I think part of that is because 1984, 85, 86, suburban Melbourne, suburban Sydney is an entire world away from wherever the movie's meant to be set, whether it's Fantasia or an American city. It was filmed in Vancouver. I don't think it was actually meant to be set in Vancouver.
No.
But that world of North American schooling was as alien as the Death Star to, I think, kids in Australia. It was just a completely different landscape, a different outlook, different accents. It might as well have been itself a fantasy from start to finish. It wasn't a grounded thing followed by the Fantasia stuff being fantastical. It was all just a bit alien to me.
Yeah, I mean, kids not wearing uniforms, that was always the big one. We'd watch things like Kids of Degrassi Street, and that seemed a very different way of life.
Yeah, and the built-up nature of the suburbs there, and schools being multi-level. I mean, it's actually, certainly in Melbourne, when we first built it, the multi-level schools here, and there's only a few of them still, that was controversial.
Oh, really?
Yeah, schools are meant to be flat, one level, maybe sometimes two level, but open spaces in Australia, certainly in Melbourne. And when they've sort of gone, well, we've only got this small patch of land in the suburbs, we're going to build upwards. It's like, oh, well, you're building a prison, you're not building a school. So yeah, it really is a foreign vibe. I've got more to say about the opening, but shall we put our cards on the table about what we thought of the movie, and I guess put the spoiler curtain down at this point?
Sure, let's bring it down. Okay, Dave, what do you think?
I really appreciated this movie. I was watching this for the fourth time, as I say, as a more grown-up adult than I have been at any other time I've watched it, obviously. And I was stunned by a number of things, but like the third time I saw it in the cinema, I was impressed by the spectacle of this movie and the imagination of this movie. It certainly has got its faults, and there are some things I'm sure we're going to talk about. But there were moments where this came up on the television, and the combination of visuals and music and concept just had me going, whoa, whoa. And I think as a piece of cinema, it is fantastic. As a story, it has good and bad points. But as a piece of cinema, especially one that's 40 years old, I was impressed.
Yeah, very fair. It's been a film I've thought about from time to time over the years, and we were doing it just recently when we were talking about films that scared kids back in the day.
Yeah.
Throw in Watership Down, the Dark Crystal, even Time Bandits is quite scary when at the end the kids' parents are blown up, basically. They die. That's pretty dark.
Even something like Flight of the Navigator, which was as kind of a fun, kiddie, buddy movie, albeit the buddy's a spaceship, that also had moments of just like real despair.
Exactly. And as I say, I was the right age to be watching it back in 85, although it didn't grab me. But then I very quickly went into that period where it or its sequels would have been, 10,000 films down the list of films I would voluntarily want to watch, And then you get older and you go back to these things and you do see new things in it with new eyes, your adult eyes, and it all becomes charming again. So,
yeah,
I'm not going to massively hype it up here at the start, but this is certainly a film that I was the right age for and then grew out of, but now I've come back and I can really appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that reflects the cycle I was talking about earlier, where I got it as a kid. As a 20-year-old, I've gone, this is a bit naff. And then when I was sort of into my 30s, now my 40s, I've gone, yeah, I get this. I think that's a very similar sort of path that I've had as well. To go back now to the opening stuff, I must admit, about 10 minutes in, I was sitting there going, have we made a big mistake here? Because usually we don't do something on Alternate Galaxies that we come on and sort of pan. It's usually about appreciating something or understanding something or learning about something. And 10 minutes in, I was going, this is really not very good.
Mm.
And I do wonder now, because it did get significantly better, if there was a very deliberate sort of stiltedness to the way that the first 10 to 15 minutes was filmed, all the stuff with Bastian at school, Bastian with his dad. It was sort of deliberately trying to be awkward and stilted and a bit cliched, you know. It's kid's a bit of a loner. Kid's dad doesn't really know how to emotionally connect with him. Kid goes to school. There are cliched bullies. They put him in a bin. He goes into a shop. There's a creepy dude there. Like, it was sort of almost like movie by numbers, and not particularly imaginatively so. And because there was such a change after that, I do wonder if there was a deliberate stiltedness, or maybe it wasn't quite as cliched in 1984. But I did find the first 10 to 15 minutes quite jarring almost. Did you have a similar experience, or am I on my own here?
I don't mind the start of it, but I think what that could be, at least in part, is this is a very European film. Because there is that famous story that Wolfgang Petersen, the director, showed this to Steven Spielberg. And Spielberg was like, oh, this might go down well in Europe, you know, Wolfgang, but here we need to make things a bit more punchy. And yes. I don't think he did the edits, but he told Wolfgang Petersen what to edit. For example, there's a scene early on where Bastian goes into the room at school to read the book. He goes upstairs into the room. In the German version, apparently, he walks through a door, then we cut to the room, and it's just a room. And then he slowly moves into shot and walks across the room relatively slowly. And Spielberg was like, no. We go from him walking through the door, and in the next shot, he's already in the middle of the room. So there were trims that were as mundane as that just to make the movie faster, even though that original longer cut of the film, I think, played perfectly fine in Germany, and the Germans thought it was all quite good. So possibly what you're saying is the film was just filmed in a slightly different way because it is a European film.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. And I must admit, I actually did seek out the edited footage, the German-only footage, and I found a pretty cool YouTube video that did do shot-for-shot comparisons.
Nice.
And you're right. A lot of the cuts that were made at Spielberg's suggestion are just a couple of seconds at the start of end of scenes to try and tighten things up. But there are some extra little bits of dialogue. There's some stuff in the bookstore that adds a bit of an extra dimension to what's going on. And then there's some completely frivolous scenes like the security guard coming doing a sweep of the room where Bastian is and not finding Bastian, and then Bastian sort of goes back to where he is. So they are very much done for pacing. And you're right, it probably is an interesting hybrid of a very German movie, particularly at the start, made for Americans. And even though the version that we see is the American cut, that still can't help the fact that it's a very, dare I say, Germanic, expressionist sort of movie.
Yeah, well, each culture has its own way of making film. I talk on the show often in What Have You Been Watching? Like, I've been watching some J-dramas from Japan. Japanese dramas are quite different to what we watch. You know, you watch those and you think, oh God, this is very Japanese. It just is. And so I think there are differences between countries, without doubt. And I'll just say, I think Petersen gave Spielberg Atreyu's Auron necklace as a thank you for helping him with those edits. Isn't that
Oh, wow,
nice?
I didn't know that. That's very cool.
Yeah, so if you're wondering where the Auron is these days, Spielberg's got it.
No, that's very cool. The other memory I have as a kid of that is that I found the bookshop owner quite creepy and almost malevolent as a kid, whereas watching it as an adult you can sort of get the ironic nature of some of the stuff he's saying. You do get that sort of twinkle in the eye after Bastian does what's expected of him and takes the book. I sort of felt when I was a kid that this was an evil guy setting Bastian up, whereas as an adult, you can see all the little subtle hints and traits and nods and winks, and you go, no, he is setting Bastian up, but because he sees something in Bastian, not because he's a creepy dude.
Yeah, like he said, I think he says the book is not safe like other books or something like that.
Yes, but when you get that moment where Bastian, because he's the good kid, he doesn't even just steal the book. He says, he leaves the note, I've just borrowed it, I'll bring your book back, because he has to be that good kid. And you see the look the bookstore gives, and yeah, as an adult you go, that's a really wonderfully understated but very clearly stated piece of cinema, and I appreciated it a lot more, yeah.
Now, Wolfgang Petersen, who actually died just a few years ago, directed this, as we mentioned a moment ago, German director, of course. People would have known him about this time, Dave, for doing Das Boot, which must have seemed quite insane to people who were older and following film, whereas I was just a kid at this time. I wouldn't have known Wolfgang Petersen if he came up and kicked me in the backside, whereas people who are into film would have been like, oh my God, this guy's just made a gritty World War II movie where the U-boat gets sunk and a ton of the characters die. Then he goes and makes this. I mean, the whiplash would have taken your head off, surely. Even when you look at what he went on to make later, stuff like In the Line of Fire, Outbreak, Air Force One, The Perfect Storm, Troy. None of these are fantasy films for kids with puppets. Making this was such an interesting step for him. It's like, I don't know, Michael Bay making a Muppet movie or something. Yet he clearly adored doing it when you see him talk about it. Yet he never did anything like it again. And I think in part that's just because the story, the novel of the NeverEnding Story, is such a big deal in Germany and means such a lot to Germans.
I think that there's a very real parallel there with Spielberg, in that clearly Petersen's box office commercial success and cinematic success was such that at this point in his career he could say, I want to make this and I want 60 million Deutschmark to do it. And people are willing to go, okay, you've earned that, have a crack. And I think the parallel is probably Spielberg making Close Encounters, where he would have been sitting down with studio executives and they've gone and said, I want to make an alien movie. They've gone, oh great, so like Aliens. No, it's basically just Richard Dreyfuss sort of wandering around freaked out for 2 hours. Oh, then we meet some aliens? Not really.
There's some lights.
Yeah, and they're going, okay, well, I guess it's Spielberg. We'll give him a crack.
Yeah,
I think it's a very similar sort of thing. Of Petersen had just reached a stage where he could make what he wanted to make more than what the studios wanted to make.
Yeah, I think that's right.
But I guess the other thing we should say is that although the book by Michael Ende hadn't been big worldwide, it was a phenomenon in Germany in the early 80s. And this is a Germany that's only just really getting its feet off the ground from World War II, in terms of cities now being properly renovated and growing, in the West at least. And that first generation of post-war kids now becoming adults and them having kids of their own who were just completely, generations removed from the war. And this was sort of one of those first big cultural breakouts for Germany. So I guess it would have made a bit more sense to give him the 60 million marks in Germany than it would have here.
Oh, without doubt. And nice segue into the author, Michael Ende, because apparently, Dave, he had a big hissy fit when they were putting this together, particularly when they decided to add that scene at the end where Bastian rides Falkor down the street chasing the bullies. Because Ende didn't see the logic in this at all, that something from this fantasy world would come into the real world. And what's interesting is, while I go with that scene as an adult, like, yeah, that's fine. When I was a kid, I did actually have a problem with Falkor being in the real world. So that childlike mindset that I had of how can this thing from this fantasy land now be in the real world, that doesn't compute, was actually how the author felt. And I sat here after watching it this time wondering, maybe he retained that sort of childlike mindset as an adult. Hence his hissy fit and trying to get the film shut down and a lawsuit and all of this. But it's a mindset that I grew out of as I grew older.
Yeah, I must admit, the first time I saw it, I would have been very close to falling asleep. So that scene, I do remember it, but being almost sort of like, is the movie over now? Because I say, I was 7, I was staying up late to watch it. So
yeah.
But at that stage, I was so baffled by the whole thing that, one more baffling thing wasn't going to affect me. But I think everything you say is true. But beyond that, I saw an interview with Petersen again on YouTube when I was researching this, and he spoke about that discussion he had with Michael Ende. And I think Ende had really passionately bought into the concept of what Fantasia is, that it is this creation of the imaginations of the collective works of humanity, and it's now dying out, etc., etc. He'd really bought into that concept, and so when they said, "Oh, we're going to tack this on at the end," he's like, "No, that undermines the whole point of what this thing is. We can go to it but it can't come to us. And I think he just passionately believed that to the point, he did try and shut down a movie that the equivalent now in terms of budget would be about a $300 million US movie.
Yeah, wow.
But, and maybe we're jumping to the end here, I actually think that Peterson was absolutely right. As a book, it would not have worked, and yes, conceptually, it doesn't work, but as a piece of cinema, you need a cinematic full stop to the story, and that, I think, does work very, very well as that full stop that brings us all back to the start. It brings Bastian to the point he needs to be as a character. It gives us the scenes of Atreyu and Artex just galloping again along Fantasia, and all our friends are back, and everybody's happy, and you leave the cinema going, yeah, wow, nice. In a way that, movies end differently to books. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, and we should note he only made half the book.
Yes.
So he had to put something there at the end because he was stopping halfway through the book anyway. Yeah.
Yes, and we'll come to that.
Okay. After these early scenes, Dave, we do enter Fantasia. Bastian begins reading the book. The world is introduced. We learn that the land's being consumed by the Nothing, and all of this, and we meet Atreyu. How do you feel about all these scenes, introducing the world, now that we're in Fantasia and we've left Vancouver, as it were?
Yeah.
Substituting for Munich or something.
Yeah, Munich or New York or something. Just generic Western city, yeah. Yeah, these scenes are some of the best in the movie, I think. The establishment of Fantasia is done very effectively because you very quickly get the sense that it is a very vast, different sort of land with different sort of creatures, and there is clearly an effort to make sure that they're not all just men in rubber suits. You get people like the Rockbiter and the like, who are clearly different to that. At the Empress's court, you get very different sort of people again. So that sense of sort of this fantastic fantasy world is really, really effective. And at the same time, the threat of the Nothing and the visualization of the Nothing is just really effective, and no one needs to explain it. Doesn't need an origin story. You just know very quickly what it is, and that exchange between the Rockbiter and the others, including Deep Roy, Doctor Who's Deep Roy, whose voice is dubbed for some reason.
Yeah, I had no idea.
Yeah, I don't know why that is. Nobody can explain why that is. I've seen some making-ofs, and everybody's like, yeah, that's not Deep Roy. Don't know why. Anyway, I remember those scenes as a kid and just understanding exactly what the threat was. And then to take it up to the moment where, through the eyes of the people going on the quest to find the Empress, you see the Ivory Tower for the first time, and there's that big synth swell and that visual graphic, the backdrop. That was the first moment where I've just gone, wow.
Yeah.
Fine. I am in now. I am all in.
Yeah, Giorgio Moroder's music. Of course, he wrote the NeverEnding Story song that Lamal sings, which isn't really in the film. But those other twinkly little bits, like da 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 da,
yes,
da, 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 yeah, that's all Giorgio Moroder as well. It's really great stuff. I've got to say, a lot of the movie still really looks good today, as these practical effects really stand up, and this opening is where we start seeing the practical effects, of course. The creatures and the landscapes clearly aren't real, but because they're practical, whether it's puppetry or animatronics, or it's just matte paintings or miniatures, and it's all filmed in camera, they do have that tactile, physical presence that CGI lacks, even in films today where they've spent hundreds of millions of dollars. I tried to think of a term for it. It's like sort of a tactile unreality, or it's heightened reality. These are the best ways I can describe it. And I think the original Star Wars is the same. We see stuff in that obviously isn't real, but because it's something shot in camera that's here in the real world with us, it's still far more real than a piece of CGI can ever dream of being, Dave.
Yeah, it's why the first Jurassic Park still stands up visually compared to a number of its much more expensive and much more modern successes, because you're right, there is something about a real tactile thing there. But the effort that they go to and the creativity that they use there is absolutely amazing. They had somebody who was an aeronautical engineer designing jet planes who was helping with the animatronics. And I watched some of the behind-the-scenes footage, and they would literally have 3 people just operating one of Rockbiter's eyes, and then 3 people on the other eye, and then 5 people on the mouth. Just amazing levels of practicality. But, yeah, look, at no point does the Rockbiter look real, but it looks convincing, sufficient that it makes the land feel real.
Yeah. I think the only bit in the film that looks a bit crap to me is when Falkor is flying in the distance.
I had exactly this note. Keep going.
No.
Yes.
Really? Okay. Yeah, close up, Falkor looks great. But when he's animated and zooming around in the distance, I don't know if it's just missing frames or something, but it's all herky-jerky and shaky and it looks very fake. That's the only bit I think that looks crap.
What I think it is his legs.
Okay.
Because Falkor hasn't really been designed to be a real functioning creature. His head functions and works and looks pretty good, although I think of all the animatronics in the whole movie, I think generally Falkor is probably the weakest. I think Rockbiter and Gamork are far better. And the tortoise is awesome. But Falkor sort of doesn't quite work as well. But particularly, his legs just sort of sit there flat. And when he's flying, all they've sort of done is taken that model and sort of moved it through the sky. There's no sense of his legs sort of, flopping down under, or he's had to tighten his muscles to defy gravity or something. It just doesn't feel natural. There's something... His body really doesn't move. It just looks like a static puppet flying across the room. So yeah, I'd exactly the same note. I think that Falkor's the weakest affecting this. But otherwise, yeah, there's nothing else I've gone, oh, that's really ropey. There's stuff I've gone, they'll do that better now. But that's the only one where I've gone, yeah, it doesn't look great.
You mentioned meeting Morlach, that ancient turtle. That's, of course, part of Atreyu's quest, which is the next section of the film, so let's go there. Atreyu sets out on his horse Artax, but pretty soon, Dave, we get to the scene in the film that everyone talks about.
Yeah.
It still makes everyone sad. Coincidentally, in the swamps of sadness, Artax bites the dust.
Yeah, look, you're absolutely right. This is the film that anybody of our age who saw this as a kid goes, the horse! And it's absolutely brutal. It took them weeks to train the horse to actually just stand there and allow itself to be lowered in the mud. And made it even harder by the fact that Atreyu is just begging him and crying. So the horse is getting very distressed. One cut that was made from the German version to the US version, the German version stays on that even longer. And it really hammers home the tragedy of Artax. So you can see why they made that one there. But it's an amazing scene. It's utterly convincing. I was surprised watching it this time how quickly or how soon it is in the movie. It's only about a third of the way in, and I remember it being much later in the movie. So that really surprised me. But my God, it just bloody hits you. And I want to mention as well at this point, I think it's a good time just to bring up Noah Hathaway's performance as Atreyu. He's a very impressive young actor, and he does those emotional scenes really, really well. He does the sadness really well. He does the desperation really well. Naturalistic dialogue, he's a bit weaker at, but what I really noticed watching it this time is the decision that Peterson's made as the director, clearly, and also Peterson did the most of the adaptation for the screenplay of the book. He's clearly gone, look, I'm going to have a child actor here. I'll find an actor that can do big emotion and all the rest of it. But there's far less dialogue for Atreyu than I remembered. There's a lot of Atreyu wandering around looking scared, wandering around looking amazed, facing up to stuff. There's the whole sequence with the oracles where it's other characters talking him through it, but he himself doesn't have dialogue. And I think there's quite a wise decision there to limit that. But look, as child actors go, it's a very impressive performance. And yes, the horse scene is clearly the standout.
Yeah. Do you think they'd cast Noah Hathaway today if they were sticking to the story? Because the whole vibe is that Atreyu is like an American Indian. And even Peterson in some of these interviews, but certainly like, we darkened Noah up. And I'm not sure you would do that today.
Yeah, but then I look at some of the casting of the Twilight movies, and they're not that much better. And that's not that long ago. So, look, I think there's a reality that these days there are far more child actors and actresses to choose from. So perhaps there would have been a slightly wider casting sort of net. But I would also say that if you get a child actor, he's a very young actor, who can utterly convince you that his horse is dying, you cast the kid that can do that emotion.
And all I'll add to that is I've spoken on the show before about how cruelty to horses in films really gets to me. So I find this scene very, very hard. Yeah.
Yeah, but the contrast is the scene with the ancient tortoise, and that's hilarious.
Yeah. Oh, it's great with the sneezing, the way he falls into the mud and all of that. And, of course, he gives him the advice to seek the Southern Oracle, so he continues the quest on as well. He's not just there for comedy relief. He is actually progressing the story. Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. But some of those lines about, I don't even care about how much I don't care.
Yeah.
Again, as a kid, you're just like, hang on, there's a giant tortoise sneezing. That's cool. As an adult, you go, oh, this is really quite funny and philosophical. I like this.
He's almost like Marvin from Hitchhikers.
Yes. No, it is... It is like that, so it's a really cool scene, and again, I think it's the one that you need after the death of Artix to keep you in the movie.
Definitely. Big storm blows up. Atreyu gets saved by Falkor, which is, I mean, we've been talking about Falkor all the way through this, but now Falkor actually joins the movie, and then he goes and gets the help from the two gnome scientists to get past the Southern Oracle. So, what do you make of this part of the film?
It's definitely a slower part. It was a part that, as a kid, I remember that was where my interest started to wane a bit. It's like, okay, I don't really know what's going on, and it's very slow. As an adult, it is certainly a slower part of the movie. I think it probably needs to be a slower part of the movie. Is it perhaps a little bit too slow in modern terms? Yeah, probably. But good characters, good ideas. I think this is also, though, the part where the movie does start to cheat a little bit. Falkor certainly is a bit of a Deus ex canis, in that this dog just is able to rock up as convenient to just lift Atreyu out of trouble, and it happens just a couple of times too often.
Well, he's not meant to be a dog, but I know Wolfgang Petersen says on a few of those docos, oh, we made him look like a dog, and then people say, oh, he looks like a dog, and I say, no, he's not a dog.
Yes.
It's like, well, Wolfgang, why'd you make him look like a bloody dog then?
Yes, no, he's a dog. Sorry, he's a dog. And also there's a bit of a cheat in that it turns out that the way you get past the Oracle is you just go very fast. Again, it's a nice point of action, and it works visually that Atreyu just, at the moment of doubt, is able to outrun the laser beam. But as an adult, I do sit there and go, oh, okay, so he didn't need to do anything particularly emotional or telling. He just needed to run faster than the laser beam. Okay. That to me is where the movie starts to cheat a little bit.
Yeah. I do like the knight that gets zapped. I'd seen the movie Excalibur by this time. Probably not a very appropriate movie for me to have seen at the age of 10, but I had seen it. And that knight always reminded me of one of the knights from Excalibur for some reason. I think just the armour or something.
Yeah, but they show his charred body, which again you wouldn't do today.
Bastian starts getting drawn into the story more and more at this point, Dave, and he realises that he's the one who has to help because Fantasia is continuing to fall apart, and nothing's really starting to smash stuff. And Atreyu fails to stop the nothing at the end of this section, which I honestly can't go back to when I was a kid and think, oh, how did I feel when this happened? I don't know. But even watching it now, it's like, oh yeah, he fails. And like the Empress's palace is just floating in space with a few asteroids. The nothing wins.
Yeah, a couple of points to make on that. First of all, I think the way they weave Bastian into this narrative, as you said, is really effective. And something that stood out to me this time was that first moment when he goes, ah! And then you hear that echo through the ivory tower, and everyone in the ivory tower actually looks around like, what was that? And that sort of way that they slowly weave his involvement in Fantasia and show that this is more than just him reading a book and imagining the story. There is a connection between the two. I think that's really clever. I think Barret Oliver is sort of the opposite of Noah Hathaway in that he can do just normal conversational acting quite well. When he has to do the big emotion, not quite as effective as Noah Hathaway is, but better than I remembered him. And yes, probably other than the horse dying, my strongest memory of watching this as a kid is the final scene with the Rockbiter, where he has that "these look like strong hands" moment. I remember that almost word for word from being a kid seeing it. So it was obviously a very powerful scene. And that idea that these lovely, fun characters that we've seen have all died, vanished, however you want to put it, turned to nothing, it really is very powerful. And then that visual of Atreyu and Falkor flying through the remnants of Fantasia, but then finding the ivory tower is a really, again, powerful moment. But yeah, the stillness and the tragedy, the real sense of failure as they fly through that. And again, this is a point where the movie does take time correctly to really let that sink in that, wow, Atreyu's failed and Fantasia's gone. Then you get the ivory tower and you start to go, okay, we're going to get the resolution. But it does build up quite well.
Yeah, definitely. I would have still been at a young enough age at this point to still be surprised when movies do that kind of thing. For sure, because as I say, even today, I still feel something when I think, he's gone on this hero's journey. He's backed up by this kid in the real world. Like, of course he's going to win, and he doesn't.
Yeah, and we should also mention in here we have Atreyu's confrontation with Gamork, who is incredibly creepy. I think very well done. I think probably the strongest animatronic effect that they have in there, and really well done. Again, there's some cuts between the German version and the US version. The German version, Atreyu makes clear quite a bit sooner that he is Atreyu, and it's clear that Gamork has cottoned on to that earlier. But even so, I think this is a really visually good part of the movie. I think seeing the picture of Gamork, then turning around and going, hang on, this is where I'm up to in my story, there's Gamork, is really effective. But this is also where the meta or the conceptual ideas of Fantasia and what Gamork is and what Gamork is working for and what Fantasia represents and therefore what is working against that, I think is definitely laid out here in a way that I don't think children would really quite get. I think it is quite adult. I also think that this is perhaps a little bit dated. I think this is an idea that would have seemed a bit profound, but not new in 1980. But now that sort of idea of children don't read enough and humanity doesn't imagine enough and we're all slaves to modernity. Slaves to modernity in 1984, they didn't know how good they had it. Children are disengaged in 1984. Let me take you forward 40 years, guys. It just sort of feels a bit, I don't know whether, I don't know, that just feels sort of dated and almost like, come on, guys. But that is where the conceptual stuff really comes in.
I quite like it. Again, for a kid's film, putting his knife through Gamork is a pretty heavy moment, so add that to the knight and his charred body and add that to Artax dying. This film's got quite a bit in it. It's
incredibly grim. I think that there's so much of it that, particularly for a kid's fantasy movie, it is just grim. Effectively so. Like, the director's done a great job in making it that, but yeah, it's very, very grim. I do think that as violent as the death of Gamork is, Atreyu needed that hero moment, given that he otherwise does fail in his quest and actually doesn't do it. He goes on a big spiritual journey and he grows a lot as a person, but for the whole, I'm a great warrior shtick, he doesn't really do that until the confrontation with Gamork, where we finally go, yeah, okay, this kid is a great warrior, and at least he's defeated Gamork before failing to defeat the Nothing.
Well, symbolically, he gives up his weapons to go on the quest.
Yes.
Like, he gets rid of his bow and arrow, for example.
Yeah, that's true. And I think, this is the moment where you have to go, okay, he needs a win.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's Bastian who actually solves or saves Fantasia.
Yeah, we're up to that scene now. Fantasia's in ruins, as we say. Bastian realises he has to give the Empress a new name. He hesitates. He's unsure if he believes. Then he shouts out the new name. And he's transported into Fantasia and meets the Empress, like in person, so to speak.
Yeah. What do you think of the Empress's performance?
I think visually it's very good. She is a very young girl here, but they've got eye makeup on her that gives her this sort of otherworldly kind of look. I think she looks very good because she is the childlike Empress. It does what it says on the box, you know. I think she looks right, but yeah, the acting is a bit... it's not hammy. It's just very light. It's just... I don't know how it could be different, actually. But yeah, it doesn't quite work for me.
Yeah, I'm the same. I can't sit here and go, I think it's a weak performance because of this. There's just something about the performance. And maybe it isn't that it's a bad performance or it's a performance that doesn't work. Maybe just the entire thing is so unsettling that it's an unsettling performance. And maybe that's the intention.
Is it because she's like addressing the camera and breaking the fourth wall?
It's that. It's the ethereal look that she has. It's maybe a little bit of that uncanny valley of the fact that, as you say, they have made her up to be just not quite a child, but still a child. So there's a whole lot of unsettling things, I think, going on that we're not used to. And maybe that does just leave me going, I don't know what to make of this, because I am a bit like, this is just maybe a bit too weird. I don't know.
Yeah. He shouts out Moonchild, Dave. It's kind of a silly name, and I know it comes in for a bit of stick from fans, but is it better than calling out Michelle or, Marianne or something?
Yeah, I think there's meant to be more to it that either didn't come across from the book to the adaptation or doesn't quite come across in the movie, because there is a reference earlier in the movie where he says, oh, well, I'll name her after my mother. And I don't know whether the mother's name in German meant that or there's some connection or something. But the other thing is, like, you can't even hear what he calls out. And I had to go and look up what he actually named her. And I think that is a deliberate thing. It's not about what the name is per se. And maybe there's also, I think, an acceptance by the director that any name he calls out is going to be anticlimactic. So therefore, it's almost just indifferent noise. And then you save it and you don't really ever get the moment of, oh, he's called her Joanne.
Doris.
Or Una Matapedica or something, something bizarre and fantastical. Like, none of those options are kind of good options. So maybe he went for the least worst, which is that he calls out Moonshine, but you don't really hear it.
And of course, that saves the day. Fantasia's reborn. Bastian gets on Falcor. We've been discussing that scene. He sees Atreyu riding on Artax. And, everything's back to normal. He gets to scare the bullies. The world's been put to rights. It happens reasonably quickly in the end.
Yeah, it does. I was watching this and looking at the time sort of counting down and going, they're going to finish this whole movie in like 7 minutes. And sure enough, they do. And none of it does feel rushed. Actually, it's quite effective. But again, I think that ending scene, that coda scene, is far less than I remembered it being. And it is just long enough to be a nice little full stop to the movie. Sure, as I said, you leave the cinema going, oh, I had a lot of fun. What a fun ending. Everybody's safe. Everybody's accounted for. That sort of works well. And it also doesn't ram home the point. It doesn't ram home the whole, and now that Bastian's thinking about fantasy again, and he's not living with his feet on the ground, he's still remembering that you can have your head in the clouds. He's now a bigger person and a more confident person, and Fantasia's happy, and humanity. There's no closing monologue, as I think you would probably get today, spelling all that out. You just go, I get what it's doing, and it's worked. Nice.
Yeah. We mentioned budget earlier. Let's talk about how this went at the box office. It was made for about 25 million US, which, did you convert that to Deutschmark?
I saw both figures, so yes, that's what I've got as well, yeah.
Which was just a massive amount for a non-Hollywood film at that time. Even for Hollywood films, it was a lot of money. And it made about 100 million worldwide. So to my eyes, it would have broke even, at the very least, when you factor in marketing and the fact that films only get about half the box office, because the other half is taken by the cinemas that are showing it. So that's fine. I think it really would have started to make money with TV repeats and home media and all that sort of stuff. So it was a success for sure on release, but particularly afterwards.
It certainly made its money back and then made a profit at the box office, unquestionably. But yes, by the time you get, you're selling the rights to all the different networks and home video and all the rest of it, I mean, back in the days when home video was a significant part of a successful movie, it absolutely would have made its money back and then some.
Yeah.
Now, Rob, you touched earlier on the soundtrack here. I just wanted to give the soundtrack its own special little moment and call out, and the fact that there were two composers who worked on this. One who did a very traditional orchestral sort of background score, which is really good and really effective. But then for the American release, particularly, somebody else who came in and did the song, but also a whole lot of synth work. Not uniquely synth work, because you look at something like the Ivory Tower theme, and there's strings in that working fantastically, but that combination of two different musical settings I think is just really, really great. But I've got to say, the song is still a banger, and I knew the song before I knew the movie, and it's one of those songs that has sort of stayed with you. I think it's a great little sort of 1980s pop number. I will confess something here, Robin. You're going to laugh at this. Mm-hmm. Until about 2 years ago, I had no idea who Lamal was. I just thought he was some guy who was sang and done this. And it was only a couple of years ago I realised he was in a very popular British group and that he broke away to have a solo career, yada, yada, yada. I had no idea who Lamal was other than the guy who sang the NeverEnding Story. But he's awesome.
A lot of our UK listeners will be saying, no, Dave, no, he was in Kajagoogoo. That was really great.
Yeah. He was in Kajagoogoo on the other side of the planet when I was 1. Sorry, guys.
But this is, we're talking here about Giorgio Moroder doing all this stuff. I mean, Giorgio Moroder, I mean, God, he was making stuff for Donna Summer back in the disco era. He put a lot of music into Hollywood films in the 80s. So this was just an inspired choice to do both the Lamal song and the music in general. He was just hot as back in the day. Yeah,
and that very 80s trend of the hit single that comes out of the blockbuster movie.
Oh, yeah. I want to say he did Flashdance. I'd have to look that up, though. But he did that sort of tie-in stuff. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, Rob, before we wrap this all up, I just want to have a little chat about the sequels. Have you seen them?
I haven't, Dave. I've never seen the second or the third films. I actually looked up their Wikipedia entries to appraise myself of them, and my takeaway is that they were both box office bombs. Is that right?
3 significantly more than 2. I think by the time you got all of the post-release money, I think 2 would have broken even and maybe made a little bit of a profit, but it didn't make its money straight back at the box office, that's true. Look, I did actually see The NeverEnding Story 2 in the cinema when I was about 11. Mm-hmm. And so I was, particularly me at 11, exactly in the right space to enjoy and appreciate that movie. I remember that movie really being effective. Again, it's not quite as fantastical as the first one, and it doesn't have the imagery and the score of the first one, so it is a bit of a letdown there, but it is quite a powerful movie, I think, and the themes of the first one definitely resonate effectively through the second one. It is a different cast, particularly you've got Jonathan Brandis playing Bastian. Jonathan Brandis being somebody who I'd go on to have quite a crush on when I was a teenager. Him and Jonathan Taylor Thomas were sort of, my two sort of early crushes as a kid.
Right.
As well as John Wesley Shipp, who, look, I know as the dad from Dawson's Creek and the father from CW, The Flash, but obviously was about to hit big, or maybe just hit big about then, as the low-budget Flash, shall we say. So look, that movie wasn't as effective and sophisticated as the first one, but as somebody who was a kid at the right time, that hit me a lot more and I have more strong memories of that than I did the first one. The third one I didn't come across until I was definitely an adult, and that was one where I just went to a video shop at some point and hired the video or the DVD and got about a third of the way through and just gone, this is absolutely terrible. And at the time, I didn't realise it, but going back and watching the trailers now, you go, that's a very young Jack Black. That's kind of cool. And I'm almost tempted to go back and watch it just to see a very young Jack Black, now knowing who Jack Black is. But that is, I talked about the start of this movie being quite cliched and dull and real-worldy. This is even more that. This is a US school off any mid-90s television show with the characters. And it's just terrible, and that was a complete and utter bomb. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, you say you're the right age for the second film. I looked it up. 1990, I was 15. That was the year I was watching Dances with Wolves and Goodfellas, Die Hard 2. Total Recall, things like that, none of which remotely resemble NeverEnding Story 2, and just crank that up to 11 when that third part dropped. I would have been 19. I mean, Christ, I was at university. I was doing all the fun things you do when you're at university. I wasn't going to go and watch the box office bomb sequel to a box office bomb sequel to a kids movie that came out when I was 9,
No, absolutely.
I have not seen either of them, no.
No, and I think the studios knew they were onto a problem with the third one because it came out in Germany in 1994. It didn't come out in the US until 1996. So I think the US distributors then knew that they were not onto a good thing.
No Spielberg to save at that time.
No, he was doing some much more famous stuff in 1994. I think it's probably two of his biggest movies came out in 1994.
Yeah, exactly. Let's wrap it up, Dave. What do you think of the movie now that you've watched it again with adult eyes in 2025?
First and foremost, as I said, I'm impressed by it. It is an impressive piece of cinema. It looks great. It sounds fantastic. It's imaginative. It's creative. It really does stand on its own. The acting is pretty good, and certainly given the age of the cast, it's very impressive. Was I enthralled by all of it? No. But I was enthralled by enough of it to go, this is quite enjoyable. It doesn't outstay its welcome. It deserves to be considered the classic that it is, but it's not such a belter that I'm going to go and put it on every year from now on.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I made a note that I could put this on for some 9-year-olds now or something, if I knew some 9-year-olds. That is, I actually don't. And I wouldn't be embarrassed by it. Like, I could say, this is a film from when I was a kid. I think you'll like it. And I could genuinely mean that. And I would be happy to rewatch it myself every 5 to 10 years. Maybe closer to 5 years. I think it's good enough to have a refresh, because watching it with adult eyes, it is charming. As you mentioned, there are scenes like the big turtle that are just funny to adults that maybe kids don't get. There's a lot in here to enjoy. It's just a very enjoyable film, and it does rattle along. It doesn't outstay its welcome. You can watch this very, very easily on a wet afternoon. So, it's a thumbs up for me for NeverEnding Story.
Yeah, and I particularly contrast it with another movie from about the same time that I rewatched about a month ago, because I'd seen it as a kid and I had memories of it being a very big deal at the time, and that's The Boy Who Could Fly. And I thought, this didn't really make any sense to me as a kid, but it seemed quite profound. I watched it as an adult, and as an adult I've just gone, okay, this is very earnest, and this is very well-intentioned, but my God, has it dated, and it is a very slow piece of cinema that doesn't really work now. So, yeah, the fact that the NeverEnding Story from a couple of years earlier stands so much better, I think is a real credit to it. It's a great film.
Yeah, Wolfgang Petersen. He's made some good films.
He has, hasn't he?
If only Das Boot was a sci-fi or a fantasy.
Fair enough. But some movies which are sci-fi and fantasies, Rob,
yes,
that I have pitched to you that we should do as our next little triptych of alternate galaxies. We did the Star Wars prequels. We did the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And we are now going to do 3 Star Trek movies.
Yes.
Now, I have said that I'm going to pick the first 2 because I want to pick the movies that I have something to say, and I think that you'll have something to say. So the next alternate galaxies we do will be on Star Trek 2, The Wrath of Khan. And at the end of that, we'll reveal the second one we're going to do. But then, listeners, we'll put up a poll and we'll let you vote for which of the 4 next generation movies we do. Because, look, I've got stuff I could say about all of them. So let's see what you're most interested in. But we'll do Star Trek 2, another original crew one, and then a next-gen one that you guys pick. And Rob, look, I've been keen to talk about Star Trek for a while. I'm more into Star Trek, less Star Wars. You're more a Star Wars guy. So I'm going to be curious to see how you react to all these.
Yeah. That said, I have the box set of Blu-rays of the Star Trek films on my shelf, so I'm not a Star Trek hater or Star Trek illiterate, but yes, very much so you're way into Star Trek more than me.
Yeah, as I say, I mean, I'm still a big Star Wars fan, but I'm not nearly the Star Wars lore expert that you are. So a nice little inversion here, and I'm keen to see what you make of these 3 Trek films that we watch.
You've read the Star Trek novel Imzadi. I haven't.
I've even read Imzadi too.
Oh, God.
I've got a shelf full of Star Trek novels. I've got more Star Trek novels than Star Wars novels. In fact, other than Doctor Who, I'd have more Star Trek books on the shelf than any other title.
Yeah, wow. But that's all going to be next time, Dave.
It will. So we'll do that in a 3-month block. Whether that starts in August or September will just depend on our lives. But yeah, coming this year.
Yeah, excellent. But until then, I've been Rob.
Und ich bin Dave.
And we'll see you next time on Das Doctor Who Show.
Good Nacht.
Good Nacht.
Young Bastian ran from bullies bold and found a shop of stories old. He found a tale both strange and grand, then climbed upstairs, the book in hand. The book began, a world in flight, with ivory towers and fading lights. Then nothing came, a big black blot, existential dread, or just a plot. It's the never-ending podcast. Your soul, where traumatizing kids is the goal. Young Atreyu got the hero call, with an orange necklace not so small. Through swamps of sadness he did tread, and yes, the horse scene wrecked some heads. A tortoise mumbled slow and dry, while laser gates zapped passers-by. A mirror showed surprise, a boy who faced his fear and found his joy. It's the never-ending podcast. Hidden though its swamps are vast, Fantasia's weird, the stakes are high, and little Bastian's just some guy. The world was gone, just stars and sand, but dreams are stronger than what's planned. One small wish and kid-like clout, Bastian magic the wheel back out. He flew on Falcor, scared the jerks, a lovely twist, revenge that works. And though more tales were left to write, the credits rolled, they kept it tight. It's the never-ending podcast. Childhood fears are recast, from horses lost to towers tall. We'll squeeze the story into song for all. When dreams grow dim and hope feels thin, and swamps of sorrow pull you in, just tune in, don't be afraid. Rob and Dave have paved the way.